We saw earlier that the only decisions possible in a hypothesis test are to reject the null hypothesis or to not reject the null hypothesis. That's it. Those are the two possibilities. So when you make those decisions to either reject or not reject, there are some possible outcomes from that. And that is what we want to talk about right here. And I've written it up here in this table, but I think it's easier to see kind of in this graph. So if the null hypothesis is true and you do not reject it, that would be a correct decision, right? Or vice versa, if the null hypothesis is not true and the alternative is true and you reject the null hypothesis, that's also a correct decision. So these are these two correct decisions right here. So this one right here, that decision is correct. Let me highlight that. Then reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis was false. That would be this one right here. And this decision right here to not reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true would also be a correct decision. But there are a couple errors you can make. You could reject the null hypothesis even though it was actually true. That would be a type 1 error. That's right here. Or you could not reject the null hypothesis, but the alternative was true. That would be a type 2 error. See right there. Okay, now keep in mind, this is somehow based on the fact that we would magically know reality. Of course, in statistics, we never really know reality. We don't know what's truly true or false. We just know what we have evidence for and do not have evidence for. So I've somehow magically been able to figure out that null hypothesis is true, and therefore if I reject the null hypothesis, that would be making a type 1 error. All right, so let's consider the US criminal system. Legal criminal system. So the null and alternative hypothesis, according to the Constitution, is that you are innocent until proven guilty. Now, some may argue that that might not be the case in certain DA's office or whatever, but according to the Constitution, that is the rules that we live by. You are innocent until proven guilty. In other words, the burden of proof in a trial is on the prosecutor to prove that you did something wrong, not on the defense attorney to prove that you were innocent. All right, so let me type those up real quickly. There we have it, the null and alternative. Now, what are the possible outcomes of all of this in the grid below? So let's think about this. The person is truly, now also keep in mind, we are somehow magically able to know reality, which of course in real life doesn't actually happen. So this would be the person truly is innocent, right? So let me bring this in. Person accused truly did not commit the crime. Over here would be the alternative. And again, I'm somehow magically able to know the reality, which is the person truly did do the crime. Okay. Okay, so what are the possible verdicts? If we do not reject the null hypothesis, that means we let the null hypothesis stand, which means the verdict is not guilty. Okay, that would be that verdict. If they reject the null hypothesis, they're rejecting the innocence of that person, which means the verdict is guilty. Oop. There we go. All right. Now, this one would be a correct decision. For this particular square right here, the person did not commit the crime and the verdict is not guilty. That would be a correct decision to make. An innocent person walks free, is free. Smiley face. All right, so that's a good thing. All right, then what would also be a correct decision is down here in the corner, right, which is a guilty person is convicted. Guilty person is convicted, is sent to jail or sent to prison. All right, that would also be correct. And that would be a good thing, right? There we have it. All right, that leads us to these two blanks left here. So this one is an innocent person is wrongfully convicted. Okay, so innocent person is wrongfully convicted. That is a type 1 error, right? Not good news at all. It's the yellow one that you see up above. Okay. So some examples of this would be, well, if you look into exonerated death row people, so let me type that up 1 second. There we have. There's a whole bunch of, well, actually, there's one major legal group called the Innocence Project, which has been proving for years many people that were on death row or in life in prison were actually innocent by testing DNA evidence. They've released so far hundreds of people from death row. And Shawshank Redemption, of course, is a movie about that same idea of an innocent person that is behind bars for something they didn't do. All right, now type 2 error would be the opposite. It's when a guilty person is not convicted. A guilty person is let go. So let me paste this in here. There we go. So a guilty person is set free. Now, I put in here a couple examples, which are kind of funny. I mean, the Joker from Batman, right? So from Batman, because we know he's guilty and yet he's always managing to run around free. Now, granted, it's not usually because he got himself off in a trial, but it could happen. Soap opera villains, if ever you watch a soap or a nightly soap, something on the CW, for example, it will be full of villains that are walking around free that got off, right? So, of course, one of the advantages to both of these, well, especially for Shawshank Redemption and the Joker and soap operas, is we actually have a God's eye view. We know as watchers who did it. We know that this soap villain did it. We know that the Joker is guilty. We know that Tim Robbins is innocent in the Shawshank Redemption, right? So we know these things because we're able as third-party viewers to see what happened, right? In real life, of course, we generally don't know what happened. Right? Even with videotapes or with blood evidence, we sometimes don't know what happened. We know what we have evidence for. So, for example, the exonerated death row inmates, people convicted these people thinking they knew that they were guilty, but DNA evidence was later tested and proved that those people did not do it. And what's interesting about those cases is that sometimes the DA that prosecuted those people still will not admit that they did wrong, will not admit that the person is innocent, even if they are proven by DNA evidence to do it. And that's because, of course, nobody really knows what happened. We just know what we have the evidence for. If you're interested in this type of thing, by the way, first of all, every time something like this happens and a death row inmate or somebody who is in life in prison gets let go, they're always on the news because it's such a traumatic, tremendous experience. And also there's a documentary called After Innocence, which is a fascinating look at what happens to death row inmates after they're let go because they were never trained, never given education, because they always thought that they were going to die. And so therefore, when they're let go, they usually don't have any jobs, prospects, any education. And that's a tremendously sad state of affairs. Of course, the opposite is also a sad state of affairs. You don't want people that are murderers walking free on your streets as a general rule. Oh, I should have put smiley face in here. And these are frowny faces. There we go. There, I pasted in the link so you could go to it if you're interested, which is www.innocenceproject.com. All right, so let's think about an example that's a little bit less fraught, since obviously, murder convictions is kind of a scary thing. So let's talk about a lottery. So if you have a null and alternative hypothesis given below, which is when you go to take a lottery, you assume that the lottery is fair. And the alternative to that is the lottery is biased. So we're supposed to describe what it would mean to take a type 1 and type 2 error in this situation. So let me add in something real quick. All right, there we have it. So we have type 1 error, and I just reminded you in parentheses, that's when you reject the null hypothesis, but it's true, and H1 is false. So what would that be like? That would be we think the lottery is biased, but it's actually fair. Now, gamblers do this all the time. So gamblers think they can find a system, quote unquote, that will allow them to win more often, losing sight of the fact that the lottery cards or they're particularly bad about this with those machines, slot machines. The slot machines are fair. Okay. So if you go to a casino and you watch them, they'll sit there and go, oh, this one hasn't hit in a while and blah, blah, blah. And if I could just get this one, right? They think there's some kind of bias. And if they could just figure out that bias, then they would win. But that's not actually the case. I mean, in general, those machines are fair. Or the lotteries, they'll do the same thing with at the gas station. If you watch them, gamblers will, oh, I want number 22 and number 4 and blah, blah, blah. And they think they have some kind of system, but in actuality, it's fair. It's, every card has just as likely a chance to win as every other card. All right, now the alternative to that is you think that the lottery is fair, the lottery is actually biased. So for example, the first Hunger Games book or movie, they talk about it, they say, how many times is your name in there, right? So Gale's name is in the bowl, Gale being the male friend of Katniss, the lead heroine. So Gale's name is in the bowl, selection bowl, much more than Peeta, for example, the other male character, because his family is poor, right? So it seems like, you think it's fair that they talk about may the odds be ever in your favor, but it's actually not in anybody's favor. May the odds be ever, I think it's what it's called, in your favor. So the Capitol's treating the Hunger Games like they're fair, quote unquote. But of course, the book is all about how they are completely biased against obviously the districts as well as the poor people. And of course, if you haven't read the book, then I'm sorry, just imagine, right? You think the lottery is fair, but it's actually rigged, right? You somehow take a lottery with Al Capone, right? So Al Capone will not treat you fairly, just on a side note. And of course, the world is full of examples of this particular one where people thought something was fair and it wasn't because somebody was doing insider trading or I'm thinking of the stock market in that case, that kind of thing. All right, so let's pause right here and we'll come back to talk about the level of significance.